All right, hey everybody, this is Mr. Longacre. Sorry I couldn't be in class today, but we'll have to have our first experience with learning through online videos as a way to kind of keep us moving forward even when I'm not able to be there. So, this should look familiar. This was the mental map activity that we finished last class. You all had a chance to kind of take us to a place within your own community. But what I want to do today is kind of talk to you about some other different types of maps. And the first one is called a thematic map. Now, these are other tools that geographers use to gather information. So this could be another example of what you wrote down for your warm-up today, and that is a thematic map. Now, a thematic map is really interesting to me because this is a map that can show any particular aspect of a country or region. Now, the first example we have here is a map showing us the percentage of the population that is under the poverty level in 2000. Now, poverty is the amount of money one makes, and typically that is calculated by taking minimum wage over a full year. And if you're making less than that, for any reason, it could be maybe you're babysitting, maybe you're a student, or whatever that might be, then you're technically under that poverty level. So on this map, you see here down here in the red and orange areas are the amount of people who are living under poverty. Those are the highest percentages. Then if you look on this map, you'll notice throughout through the American South, and then also in West Virginia, there's going to be a high percentage of people living under the poverty level. And a map like this kind of gets to show you where some of the wealthier areas of our countries are. For example, the dark green up through here in the Northeast are some of the wealthiest areas. And that's pretty typical for our country, that a lot of our money is in the Northeast, in places like Philadelphia, Baltimore, D.C., New York, Boston, so on and so forth. But a thematic map can be just about anything. If you take a look at this one, this thematic map shows what each country leads the world in. A couple to note, Russia leads the world in raspberries and nuclear warheads, while Canada leads the world in maple syrup and asteroid impacts. So these are kind of funny things. I mean, a thematic map is just meant to show you visually a set of data that you might have collected over time, or anything that you want to show. They can be fun, they can be very real, or they can be somewhere in between. Here's another example of a thematic map. In this case, you're looking at all the roller coasters that are in the United States, and the larger the circles, the more that they are. If you look over here on the legend, the tallest circles are 72. And you'll notice in the Northeast, again, lots of roller coasters in California, and then some kind of scattered throughout a lot of the Midwest. So this is another thematic map. And so your job tonight will be to create one of these thematic maps. You will start by really thinking about what is a data set that I want to show. What is a type of information that interests me that I can show visually on a map. At this point, if you would like to go up to the front and grab the thematic map activity and actually look at what that activity is, I'm going to go to it here in our notes so that you can see it and see what I'm talking about. But this will be your homework assignment tonight. The thematic map activity is really a continuation of what we were working on with the mental maps and some of the skills that we were doing. But for this assignment, you are going to create a thematic map, and you're going to pick one particular aspect. Here are things that you need to incorporate into that map. It can either be drawn or clearly printed. It needs a title, key, and scale. And you do have to do some research in order to have information. Here are some examples from the past. Okay, some students have done the most popular Pokemon in Pokemon Go, and they did the most popular Pokemon by state, and they created a symbol for each Pokemon, and then they put that symbol both in their key and also on the map. Some students pick their favorite sports team, and they do a thematic map about where each member of the sports team is from. Some students do a county map, and they talk about the different land uses in our county, where there's farmland, where there's housing, and where there's other things. So your map can be about many, many types of things. However, what you cannot do is go to Google, type in thematic map, and print off a map. That is not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for you to find some information and then figure out how to display that on a map, either at a local, state, or national, or even world level. So think carefully about that. You can come see me sometime if you're unsure about what you're doing. You can print an outline of the area you want to show. For example, if you want to do the United States, you could print a map of the United States, but in no way, shape, or form can you just print out a thematic map and think your job is done. So be sure to read over this assignment. This is due the following class, so for you all, this will be due on Thursday. And please make sure you have that done by the time you come back. All right, so at this point, let's go back to Notes B. A couple other things I just want you to be aware of are some other tools that geographers can use. Databases and diagrams. These are very useful for statistics and demographics. The difference in these databases and a GIS, however, is really what they're intended for. A GIS is a geography-specific database, whereas these can be many different things, but all are helpful to geographers. Since geography is the study of everything on Earth, all types of information can tell us about the people that live there. Now, when you use these sources, the one thing you do need to be very wary of is two things: bias and perspective. Bias are unfair assumptions or prejudice that we have towards something or someone. And we got to be really careful with bias. Bias is inherent in being human. It's part of who we are. And so even if we don't realize it, sometimes we have bias towards things. And we always need to make sure that we're trying to limit how much bias we are using in our daily life. Some of the best examples I can give you of news sources that use bias are what you see on this slide. For example, Fox News will show a much more conservative viewpoint of political events, whereas this website, the Press Democrat, is going to have a much more liberal viewpoint. Both could report on the same thing, but based on their perspective and bias, could have very different outcomes. So just be careful of that. It's critical that you determine the reliability and validity of the information that you use. Make sure that they're accurate and that you're using information that is true, and that your facts can be verified with information. If you're dealing with opinions when it comes to geography, then you're really not dealing with the information that is most useful and need for this particular case. Okay, so that's the end of Notes B. Now what I'd like you to do is go over to Notes C, and we're actually going to keep on talking about some different maps. In this case, we're actually going to talk about projections of maps and how we organize our world. Now, when you're dealing with maps, the number one issue that you're always going to have with maps is a term here on the left side called distortion. Distortion refers to how a map does not always show true size or relative location. I think many of you saw this when you created your mental maps, in that you tried your best to show distance and relative location, but the reality was that all maps are not perfect. And so if you look here on this map, the blue outline is a very typical map that you'll see. The green is the actuality of what the world really looks like. In particular, I want you to notice a few things. For example, how much larger Africa is in reality than what we usually show on a map. I want you to see how Greenland here, this country, is actually much smaller than it realizes. Most people don't know this, but Greenland can actually fit into the United States 5 times. So that's how small this area is. But on this map, on the blue side, it looks much bigger. That is due to distortion. It distorts things. And the reality is, the reason that distortion is such a problem is because we live in a round world that is we are trying to show on a flat map. And whenever you take anything that's round and you try to flatten it out, you're inherently going to have distortion. It just happens. It's very hard to do. And so when geographers use tracking, oftentimes the best model that they will use is a globe. A globe is a scale model. It's round, it's useful, and it has a lot of advantages. For example, it allows us to organize our globe using grid lines, but keeping that circle formation. There isn't a lot of distortion on a globe because the world is in fact shown in its natural element as a circle. And you can easily track different locations and continents on the globe. The problem with the globe is that it's heavy and that it's bulky and it's big, and you don't usually see people carrying globes around, and so sometimes we're limited in how we use them. And so to help with this and to make it a little more practical, geographers have created other types of maps that are flat that can be used in your textbooks and are a little bit easier to read. So there's going to be 4 types of maps you need to be familiar with. The first one is a Mercator projection. This is a very standard projection due to its ability to show the grid lines, but it does have some problems. So let's first talk about its uses, and you want to copy these down into your notes. The first use for a Mercator projection is that it's very easy for ship navigation. You can see on this map that it's very square, and so the grid lines are all going to match up perfectly, and it's very easy to read. The problem with it, though, is that because it's flat and there is no rounded edges, it has some considerable distortion. Again, here's Greenland. It looks very, very large when it shouldn't be. Africa should be much larger than what it's shown on here, and so you do have a lot of distortion there. That's your Mercator projection. The second projection is called actually, I'm going to go to this one. The second projection on your notes is called the Robinson projection. And this projection allows us to see the entire world at once, but minimizes distortion because of the rounded edges. So notice the difference here on the left and the right side. The edges are actually rounded, and this is what you see in classrooms. This is the type of map you work with when you open up your atlas, and it has a little less distortion than the Mercator projection because it has a little bit of that rounded edges, which is what the world is truly like. The drawbacks of it, though, is that there is still distortion. And when you try to follow some of these longitude lines, especially on the outside, you'll see that they curve very harshly, and it can be a little more difficult to track them. So your Robinson projection is a good model. It's not perfect. And then the last one that we use is called a polar projection. And this is a map that uses the North and the South Pole as its center. So basically, I want you to think of kind of looking at the world from above or below. On the left side over here, we have the north side. You can see by the North Pole looking down on the Earth. And then over here on the right side, you have the South Pole kind of looking up from the Earth. Now, the people that use these projections are airline pilots. When they're tracking and calculating fuel about how they're going to fly around the world, they do take into effect the roundness of the world and having the shortest distance. But the drawbacks of this is that it's really limited. We can only see the southern or northern hemisphere. We can't see the whole world at once. And so it does have some limitations, but it's useful in other ways as well. So those are your 3 projections. And the last type of map that I want you to be familiar with today is called a contour map. And a contour map is a map that's used to show elevation. On this map here on the left, you can see here in the middle it's labeled Rock Mountain. And then each one of these lines are representative of an elevation level. So it starts at 1,500 and it goes down to 14, 13, 12, 11, 1,000 feet, 900 feet. And it allows you to see just how tall this mountain is and what some of the surrounding areas are. Now, if you look at it in a 3D fashion, here's another contour map. You can see it's marked 900, 1100 as it goes all the way up to the top of the mountain. These contour maps are very useful for architects, people who are building things, city managers who might need to know the elevation of an area before they are building. And it's also good for hunting. Finding good elevated positions might allow you to track or find an animal that you previously could not. So please study these 3 types of maps, the 3 map projections and this last type of contour maps. They're very important. And that is all for today. So if any time you missed something, please go back and review the video and make sure your notes have been filled out, as we will begin with this the following class when I see you next period. All right, guys, have a good afternoon.